You can't trust Marvel or DC to do anything right with the characters that you like. They will let all these writers come in and destroy everything, yet we're the ones wrong. We're the wrong type of fans because we're not giving them a grace period so we could make it the full status quo 5 years into the future before we finally say, you know what, this really didn't work. CBR has an article up basically guilting or trying to guilt people into accepting this new X-Men reboot despite all the details being terrible. And here to talk to me about that is my good friend Doc. How you doing, buddy?
I don't try to convince you that something that is underwhelming should still be given a chance. And I don't run cover for multinational corporations the way CBR is in this article, trying to tell you, well, yes, everything is terribly, terribly underwhelming, but you should totally give it a chance, and a real comic book fan would.
And I do outright reject the premise that every new comic book status quo or release should get a grace period in there. Comics are way too expensive. There are way too many bad comic books on the market, and there are way too many bad creators to just give everything a fighting chance from day one.
The premise of this article is just that. And I wholly reject that too. Hell, we recently had that announcement for the Spider Goblin. It doesn't matter how well executed that is. It's a fucking stupid idea. I get it for the X-Men that this isn't as fundamentally absolutely retarded as Spider Goblin is, but it's just fucking bland.
Speaking of the article, he states, pretty soon the Krakoa era of X-Men will be over and the X-Men titles will be relaunched using From the Ashes as the overall tagline for the relaunch. Naturally, there are going to be comic book fans who don't want the X-Men's Krakoan era to be over. Similarly, there are going to be fans who don't think you can realistically just walk back the Krakoan era without some sort of major retcon. However, while I certainly am sympathetic to anyone who is sad that an era that they like is over, I think an important part of being a good comic book reader is to allow comic books some grace with their approaches.
I'm going to let it slide that there's actually that many people that give a shit that the Krakoa era is over. It's like 24 idiots on Twitter that just tweet relentlessly about Orgy Island. Everyone else stopped giving a good goddamn about the X-Men. Otherwise, they would still be in the Krakoan era because it would have been fucking selling.
That is true, and I don't think that you should give every comic book a grace period. If you're a fan of Flash, and you read issue 1 of Cy Spurrier's Flash comic book, and you're certain that you don't like this and that's not a good idea for you, you should check out immediately. If you think Zeb Wells would do a bad job on Spider-Man when they put him on Amazing Spider-Man, you should check out and not waste your money on a terrible run, because what are we, like in the 40s now of Zeb Wells' terrible Spider-Man run? Why give it the grace period if you know that it's going to be bad? What does Dr. Phil say, Doc? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and the past behavior of most of these current comic book writers at Marvel and DC are terrible comic books.
I've been saying that as well. Jed McKay's Moon Knight is good. Yeah, okay, it's fine. Everything else he's written for his entire career is either middling to bad. So he managed one thing and you make the assumption that the one thing that was good is now the expected outcome? No. Same way that Gail Simone. Yeah, you know what? 10, 12, 15 years ago, she used to do pretty good work. I mean, it wasn't really for me, but it was overall generally liked. That there's a chance that she'll somehow find a time machine and kidnap 2008 Gail Simone and bring her to the present to write this comic. I mean, sure, it's possible, but unfucking likely. The same way it is with Jeffrey Thorne on X-Force or Eve Ewing on Exceptional X-Men or whoever the
Kelly Jackson, Lansing. We've also got Stephanie Phillips.
It's not a big leap here. It's not a logical leap to assume that they're probably going to end up putting in subpar work, because that's what both past and recent results are for all of these people. It would be absurd to assume that they would somehow actually become good on this when they have never been so in the past.
And certainly the number one issues are going to cost more. You know, X-Men number 1 is going to be $6, and Uncanny X-Men is going to be $6, and Exceptional is going to be $5, and NYX, of course, is going to be $4. But, you know, X-Force will be $5. They're going to charge so much money for this stuff. Why would you give somebody a grace period when they're taxing you just to get into it from the very beginning?
When they start overcharging you for what would otherwise be your taste test, that's an indicator that they know you're not going to come back for issue 2, 3, and 4, and they better get whatever money out of you that they can right now, because you won't be back to be the sucker to keep coming back for seconds.
Apparently, they also have a problem with headcanon. Headcanon is the term for your personal take on a comic book character. In that piece, I explained that I am 100% in favor of people having headcanons. But where I take issue with headcanons is when people try to turn it into some sort of locked-in state for the characters, and that anything that diverges from their headcanon is inherently wrong. I think that is an improper way of reading comics and ties into the idea of being given comic book approaches some grace. There are a lot of people that are screwing up fundamental, like, not headcanon states of the character, just fundamental core competencies, ideas of the characters themselves. Bruce Wayne has no money now. He doesn't have a butler. They're going to take his name away from him. He has no dignity. He's not even the bachelor that's pretending to be a bachelor, but it's really a vigilante at night. They take away so many elements of the characters, and they're like, well, you can't be your headcanon. Well, how about we admit that Jason Aaron completely fucked up Punisher?
How about we admit that Jason Aaron completely fucked up Wolverine or Thor as well? He's using the term for readers like us that have 50 years of some fundamental foundational aspects of the characters we would like to see adhered to, like Peter Parker and his power and responsibility and feeling guilty that he let his uncle die. If you strip that stuff away, is he even fucking Peter Parker anymore? And is he any character that we really want to read? Probably not. I don't have to give that a chance. That's not headcanon, though. That's just the fucking canon. And in this article, he's conflating canon with headcanon. Headcanon is the bullshit that you have the Tumblerinas that they brought into comics, where Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes being friends meant they were fucking. That's the shit that is actually headcanon.
People, comic book fans themselves, were far too gracious and kind with a lot of readers or a lot of comic book writers in allowing them to make fundamental changes to these characters and not fighting back hard enough to where we've got to the point where writers think it's their responsibility or their purview to do anything they want with any character at any time, period. And fans can't say anything back to them because I think fans were far too gracious for far too long.
We were. I mean, I remember in like 2012, I had friends that were losing their shit about some of the changes being made back then. And my response was, you know what? It's comics. I'll be patient. You know, they're going to do something with this. And I was one of those people that wasn't quick to react. I wasn't reactionary about it because I was giving them grace, and I was giving them the opportunity to try something new and do something different and to see where we fucking got me. You know what? We've been given way too much grace, because when things were fundamentally just bad ideas and shouldn't have been done in the first place, a lot of us longtime readers were like, you know what? I'll be patient. I'll see where they're going with this. Let's see what develops. All it was, ripping up the foundation and then putting a new foundation in place that now, if we bitch about, well, it's been like this for 5 years. Yeah, because I thought you were going to fucking do something and tell some really interesting, cool story, not break the shit I like.
Yeah, I feel stupid right now because I remember when Chip Zdarsky had Elektra show up in Daredevil when Matt was in prison and she became Daredevil. I was like, you know what? She has a similar skill set, fighting style-wise. She has a history with Matt Murdock. He's in prison. I will accept the idea that she's going to take his place and protect Hell's Kitchen while he's in prison.
Yeah.
Whatever. I didn't fight back against it. I said, you know what? Let's see what happens here. He's been out of prison for over 2 fucking years. Guess who's still Daredevil?
Yeah, exactly. This is how we've been treated for the last almost 12, 13 years. When we're like, oh, this is interesting. This can kind of, I want to see where this goes. As longtime comic fans, the thing that we always knew is, well, they're going to revert back to normal. The problem is they don't now. And we're expected to not complain that the old foundational things have been totally uprooted. The X-Men becoming supremacist drug dealers was probably not the right way to go with the X-Men. And if it would have been a short-term thing where they recognized the wrong of their path and the bad decision, sure. But you know what? No, we've had 5 years of it And now we've actually had more comics published with the Orgy Island era of X-Men than we did in the entire Claremont era of X-Men that took 17 fucking years to get through.
And if people go back and listen to our reviews of House of X, Powers of 10, and we were doing some Outside the Bleed stuff with my good friend Skip, God rest his soul. If you go back and listen to that stuff, there was a basic underlying assumption on all of our parts that the real X-Men were buried somewhere and they were going to come back and like point out the mistakes of this and make it right.
I had my doubts ending that series because I was like, oh, I think that this whole drug dealing and segregationist and the lack of stakes from Resurrection and all this other stuff, I think that this is going to be a problem if they don't address it soon. And what did they do? They spent 5 years not fucking addressing it and thinking that it was a good thing. We showed plenty of grace for this. And what has our grace been rewarded with for the last 12 years? More shit. And then when we do kind of say, okay, when are you going to get this over with? What? You don't like change. You just want this to stay in the same. No, I don't want you to undermine the very foundational aspects of our characters. And when you do touch those things and you do muck around with them, you have to change them back or they stop being the thing we fucking liked.
Next up, they state you can't expect everything to line up perfectly and allow creators the freedom to try new ideas. You have to give them some grace for things not quite fitting perfectly. This is not at all some sort of don't criticize new approaches deal, as no one seriously wants that. What they do want, though, is just a little leeway with their general concept. For instance, if you're never going to accept a non-married Spider-Man comic book, then don't read Spider-Man comic books post One More Day. However, if you're going to give it a shot, then you have to concede the general concept of the book starting with One More Day, which is that this is a non-married Spider-Man. There were plenty of people that stopped reading Spider-Man after One More Day and never have come back. There are plenty of people right now that are going back to the past, reading old school Spider-Man with some of the great stories that are out there, going back and reading old school X-Men or Batman or Superman, that have generally speaking given up on new comic books because they got fed up with it and they're tired with it. The problem is we're starting to put people out of business because no one wants to buy new comic books again. We do actually have to hold the writers and the publishers accountable at some point to their bad ideas and maybe walking something back. I do think Ultimate Spider-Man with a married Peter Parker is a great example that, yes, there was a burning desire from Spider-Man fans to actually have that be the status quo of the character again.
This is what it really comes down to. They just want to make a new stasis quo for the character that is different from the stasis status quo that they think you want it to be stuck in. In fact, we wanted them to progress. We wanted Spider-Man not to get unmarried. We wanted him and Mary Jane to have fucking kids. We wanted what we're getting in Ultimate Spider-Man right now. We wanted that. 15, 20 years later, reading Spider-Man, we expected it to be about what Ultimate Spider-Man is right now, where they have a 10-year-old and a 8-year-old, and they're really kind of trying to navigate that and balance being parents with being superheroes and being a model and all those other things that are in life, as well as having a job.
And I will say this is another example why you can't give these people grace, because if you do not speak out loudly, have your voice be heard, if you don't walk out immediately on these types of things, they will never change it back. People have been asking for this for like 20 fucking years, and they act like people are enjoying this new status quo of Peter Parker just being completely miserable. When I read the first issue of Zeb Wells' Amazing Spider-Man following Nick Spencer's run, which was exciting, I was like, oh my God, they diverted him back to being miserable Peter Parker again. Fuck this book. If it was Amazing Spider-Man, I wouldn't be reading it anymore.
Absolutely. If this was any book but Amazing Spider-Man, I would have dropped it after issue 1. It still took me until issue like 15 to drop it, but that was 14 issues too fucking many. As I said, in 2012, I was the one saying, hey, be patient. I was telling like younger readers, like I had a roommate at the time that she was relatively new into reading monthly comics, and she was getting upset at some of the changes that were already getting made. And I'm like, just have some patience. I expect them to play a little bit of the long game. They're going to seed some stuff now, and eventually it'll kind of come full circle, and you'll You'll revert back to the real status quo and everything will be good. We were the ones preaching patience because we had seen it many, many times over and over again. The problem was they didn't do it this time, and now it's forced us to become the reactionaries that they claimed we were 20 years ago.
This is the final thing they had to say on the subject. People have to have the freedom to try new approaches. Can you imagine if people weren't more flexible with Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis's drastically different approach with Justice League International? There are plenty of fans who couldn't look past their beloved Justice League becoming a bit of a humorous series, but those who were flexible with it got a well-told and hilarious comic book series that became an unexpected hit. So we don't need, they did something like this already, or this sounds like X mixed with Z, so I am going to dismiss it out of hand. It's not helpful. I don't think it's my job as a comic book reader to be helpful to the publishers. As a critic, I think I am trying to be helpful by pointing out a lot of their mistakes and stuff like that. I don't think they're listening to me. But the big difference is, if they decided to take a JLI approach with a comic book team right now, it wouldn't be Keith Giffen. It wouldn't be James DeMatteis. It would be Mark fucking Russell. It would be Cody Ziegler or somebody else that wasn't funny, like a Jerry Duggan, which would ruin the fucking concept and all become about whatever their fucking Twitter fucking discussions about politics are at the time, and it would ruin the thing. We've seen it over and over and over again.
See, here's the thing. J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen had a body of work. They had a track record that fans could look to. They were able to do something experimental. They also didn't treat it like a complete joke. They built the change over time. Even it wasn't from issue number 1 that it dropped you in and was all blah ha ha from page 1 of issue 1. They coaxed the reader along into this new status quo. It was done effectively and patiently. People can get behind those kind of changes when it's done well by creators that they know have done other things well as well. This is not the creatives, and this isn't the type of change that they do in comics anymore. Now it's the most abrupt, record scratch, complete new track change that you can imagine by creators with zero track record or a track record of poor outcome and poor product. And then they wonder why we are not being patient with it. I don't fucking know. Maybe Celeste Bronfman can write something that's worth a damn once before you give her a title and then go, well, why aren't you giving her a chance? Because she fucking sucks. The end.
Yeah, you think about like Hawkman. You don't get Hawkman very often. Sometimes you'll see Hawkman in a team book, but more often than that, you'll actually see Hawkgirl in a team book nowadays. They kind of want to make Kendra Saunders a thing. We had a Hawkgirl series come out. Unknown writer. Nobody really knows who Jadzia Axelrod is. Completely different tone to anything that DC Comics has been doing previous to that. Guess what? It was all about the trans self-insert character that Jadzia Axelrod had created. It basically ruined the character of Hawkgirl in only 5 issues. And I don't think anyone ever should have given that series a bit of grace. In fact, I think people should be very, very skeptical of everything Marvel and DC are doing these days. I don't trust them to do anything with my favorite characters. Well, I only trust writers at this point. Jeremy Adams moves to a book, I move along with him. If Jeff Johns is on a book, I'm going to go read that one. There are very few writers out there that I even trust at this point that are working very often for Marvel and DC these days, because there's so many bad ones out there. You can't trust Marvel or DC to do anything right with the characters that you like. They will let all these writers come in and destroy everything, yet we're the ones wrong. We're the wrong type of fans because we're not giving them a grace period so we can make it the full status quo 5 years into the future before we finally say, you know what, this really didn't work.
Here's what it comes down to for me. They never earned it. They didn't earn our grace. The writers that got it in the past had done a body of work that earned it. When Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis and Chris Claremont and Len Wein and all those kind of second and third and fourth generation creators came on, they didn't abruptly change our characters. They tried to write them the same way that everyone else did. And then over time, once we understood, hey, these are competent shepherds of the characters that we like, when they started making changes down the line, we gave them a chance because they proved they could do it the right way. Now let's see if they can do it their way. Cody Ziegler, Zeb Wells, Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, Eve Ewing, all the rest of the other fools that they brought into the X office for this upcoming relaunch haven't earned our trust because they've done nothing to earn it.
Do you want to say thank you very much to Doc for joining me for this exhilarating conversation? I knew you were going to love that article just as much as I did. It just so happens Doc and I had a really long conversation about this. When it comes up on YouTube, it will be edited down quite a bit because YouTube doesn't like 30-minute conversations about anything for the most part when it comes to comic books. If you want the entire conversation, you will need to go over to Thinking Critical Patreon. The Doc Unfiltered podcast will also have an unedited version of the Fall of the House of X #4 review as well. There's a link in the video description if you want to check that out.